Matthias, who's with the BUILD Initiative. Again, I'm Zelda Boyd, and I'm with the National Center on Early Childhood Quality Assurance. And Michelle Atkins is joining us from the National Center on Early Childhood Development, Teaching, and Learning. And you'll hear a bit more from them later in the session. So we're excited to have with us today three speakers from two different organizations. We have Marsha Hawley and Rebecca Klein, and they are both from the Ounce of Prevention. And Valerie Mendez-Fariñas is joining us from the University of Florida, the Lassinger Center for Learning. So just as a reminder, their full bios are out on the landing pad along with some resources that they brought with them to share with us today. Those have also been posted on the landing pad for you to pick up later. So I know that the speakers do have quite a bit of information to cover today, so we're going to move right into the presentations. But just as Jen indicated, I want to remind you that although we have set points in the conversation today for Q&A, please use the chat box to ask questions, make comments, and interact with our speakers, which will make our presentation, our time with them, the most rich time that we can have. And so without any further ado, I'm going to turn over our session to Marsha Hawley, who's going to start us out.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be on this call with everybody, and I want to welcome everyone. Rebecca and I are going to have the opportunity to talk about Lead, Learn, Excel and what we've learned in our work to support instructional leaders to increase effective teaching and learning practices, and what we've done and what we're learning, and hopefully get some insights from you. So what we're doing is really trying to begin by building the relationship for learning with the driver of change, who is, we believe, the instructional leaders, and we help support the vehicle to collaboratively move towards the change, engaging in routine and predictable supports for teachers. We've been fortunate to have a lot of wonderful supporting from and initiated with the Ounce of Prevention Fund, and I'll talk a little bit about that. The Gates Foundation, Alliance for Early Success, the University of Washington to partner with us and really engage a lot of robust states to learn with us. In addition to Illinois, I'm really pleased to see some of our Oregon partners on this call, and so I'm hoping that you will chat with everybody as we go through some of this information. So we want to share what we've done to learn through our efforts to increase the learning and teaching throughout our work. So if you could advance to the next slide, please. I'm going to talk a little bit about what Lead, Learn, Excel is. And it's a professional learning program that was created for early education leaders who really wanted to work harder to get students, their children, ready for kindergarten. And it really is meant to help leaders develop the instructional leadership systems and the skills they need to better support teaching and learning in early childhood programs. And we know that the relationship for learning begins with leadership. So Lead, Learn, Excel facilitates on-the-job learning for leaders so they, in turn, can facilitate on-the-job learning for teachers and create high-quality early learning environments and have positive interactions with children. If you can advance to the next slide, please. So we have a history here, and I kind of like this slide because it just shows you how long the Ounce has been in this work. So we've been doing professional development work since 1981, and the work that we're doing with Lead, Learn, Excel, Rebecca and I, along with Deborah Paciano, started with the work on an I-3 grant. And that really was directly working with services for leaders and teachers, so seeing how supporting teachers along with leaders would work. And then as we did that and we learned, we realized that in order to have that really be sustainable, that the focus really needed to shift from just coaching teachers along with leaders to actually giving the leaders the ownership in that work. And so in 2014 in Illinois, we piloted the model with 300 sites across the state of Illinois. And we did direct professional development to teachers. We had that funded through a Race to the Top public grant, and it was largely based and connected to our quality rating and improvement system. And we had a lot of support with private foundations too. And then now we're continuing our work in Illinois and expanding into 2 other states with Tennessee and Oregon. And I have to tell you, we are really learning a lot from them and with them to explore how these concepts work in different states and in different ways. So we've changed a little bit of what we're doing to shift, in addition to direct professional development to instructional leaders, to a pilot for supporting professional development providers that will in turn support leaders. So alongside us, the professional development providers are then supporting leaders, and then they will continue the technical assistance and the support for the routines that we think are vital in this work. So this has been funded by the Gates Foundation that's in the new states, contracts that we have in Illinois, and some other work that we've done that's publicly funded, privately funded, and really trying to do both a new kind of approach, but also determining, along with other partners who are existing in our program, what sustainable supports are necessary to keep the movement going for instructional leaders. Because we really believe this is what equips leaders to install and facilitate job-embedded, on-the-job professional learning as that vehicle for improvement, and working to help early childhood teachers to collaboratively look at data through a data dialogue, examine their practice, and share that together, design and test teaching strategies in cycles of improvement so that they can think deliberately about their teaching practices. If you can advance to the next slide, please. So Lead, Learn, Excel works in, we start with the model for how we start with what we want. So in the center, you can see we've got the center of the heart of excellent childhood instruction. That's what we want. And so with the job-embedded learning, we help to support those leaders, install that, and think about that, because instructional leaders are the ones who help develop the skills to create the mindset and skills within teachers to support their learning, not by telling them what to do, but by probing and asking the right questions to think together with them to increase their capacity. If you could advance to the next slide, please. And so the way that we work is that we help start with, and this is where partners are essential, our organization leaders really help to think about how they can create and support the conditions that are needed to support instructional leadership and instructional excellence. And then we have the next part of professional development providers who train and coach together with the teachers. So you need to have like system people who help develop the system for professional development providers, or people who work directly, to think about how we can support the next box, which are instructional leaders who really work together and train and coach teachers who provide excellent classroom instruction. And all of this is on the job within the work of the work that people are doing within the classrooms. And all of this is targeting what we believe is really important, is that kindergarten readiness, in being really excited for learning and continuing learning throughout school. So all of this is based on some really important conceptual frameworks. And I'm going to let Rebecca move into the next slide. and share one of the frameworks that we think is really important.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Rebecca Klein. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the research base for Lead, Learn, Excel. Some of you may be already familiar with the 5 essential supports. This is a framework that's emerged from years of research in Chicago Public Schools by the University of Chicago Consortium on School Research. Researchers there found that schools that were improving were strong in these 5 areas: effective leadership, collaborative teachers, engaged families, supportive environments, and ambitious instruction. In fact, they found that schools that were strong in all 5 areas were 10 times more likely to improve children's reading and math. And importantly, all the schools were trying to improve, often with one initiative after another, but they found that schools that had a sustained weakness in even one support over a number of years, their improvement efforts were relegated to a less than 10% chance of success, and they found no school improved with weak leadership. So that's really the key driver, as Marsha said. So we found that this research was very compelling, and we could relate it to our past experiences with improvement efforts that had not succeeded or not been sustained in early childhood. So we adopted this framework and used it to structure the content of our trainings and our technical assistance. And we really found that it helps leaders think differently about their role as instructional leaders, and it helps them better organize and better support their improvement efforts so that they get the results they're hoping for in terms of improving the quality of teaching and child outcomes. And also, just so you know, the ounces worked on validating the 5 essentials framework and the measurement tool for early childhood, and found similar relationships, so that schools that were early childhood schools or centers that were strong in leadership and teacher collaboration had higher class scores. You can go to the next slide. So again, those effective leaders are really critical. So how do we think about effective instructional leadership in early childhood? What do those effective leaders do? So they first set a vision for practice excellence. They maintain a strategic focus on children's learning and development, in the face of all else. They enlist teachers in improvement efforts, bringing teachers into the analysis of data, planning improvement strategies, involving them in decisions that affect their everyday work. And by doing that, they build trust and shared understanding and collective responsibility for improvement. They protect time for teachers to work together, and they support and facilitate teachers' on-the-job learning. They also provide or ensure coherent instructional guidance. They act ethically, confront inequality and bias, and ensure equity in their programs. And they do all that while, managing the business of the program, including, facilities, budgeting, human resources, doing that while trying to maximize time for supporting teaching and learning. And so those are the competencies that we try to support leaders in developing through Lead, Learn, Excel. You can go to the next slide. Okay. So what about the job-embedded learning and teacher collaboration as the vehicles for change? In Lead, Learn, Excel, we help leaders understand that their system of professional development needs to include these multiple contexts. With an emphasis on job-embedded learning, training is not obsolete. Leaders, teachers, and all of us really still need training to build knowledge. But we can't expect much change in practice from training alone. There has to be supports for transfer to practice, like coaching or technical assistance, and we all know that. That's why we're here. But another context we really want to encourage and that Lead, Learn, Excel really focuses on are the collaboration routines. So, we think, and the 5 essentials research really shows, that these are really critical for teachers' learning and for changing the culture of the program to really be focused on continuous improvement. So routines like data dialogues, where teachers can analyze child data or teaching data like class together and use that data to set goals and make plans for improvement collaboratively. We've also learned that team lesson planning is a really critical routine where teaching teams can plan together, not just the activities that children will do, but they plan intentionally for instruction for groups of children as well as individuals. And then there's also professional learning communities, and those can take many different forms, like study group or examining documentation of children's learning or sharing video of teaching practice. But we really focus on helping leaders structure those collaboration routines and develop the facilitation skills to make them effective. And when those collaboration routines are done well, they can really be truly transformative for individuals and for the organizations. And then there's that last context here, supervision. When it's reflective, it's also an important opportunity for professional learning. So in Lead, Learn, Excel, we help leaders to explore the value of these professional learning contexts. We help them figure out how to incorporate each of their strategies into their system, which involves shifting leadership roles and responsibilities and finding ways to make these routines logistically possible. And then we help them ensure that these routines are connected and coherent, and again, help them develop the skills to facilitate. Okay. So I would say the last thing about those multiple contexts for learning is that they're important for leaders at every level, or educators at every level, I would say. So then the next slide, in Lead, Learn, Excel, we offer support at every level of the system. We try to walk the walk in supporting leaders to support those that are that they're supporting, so that they can best support children. So our model includes consultation and co-planning with system leaders, like state agency leaders. We also offer a suite of professional learning services for instructional leaders, and that includes principals, directors, pre-K or education coordinators, coaches, teacher leaders, and we actually strongly recommend that leaders participate in leadership teams from their program. We found that that's a lot more effective than individual leaders participating on their own. And now that we're working in other states beyond our home state, we also want to support local professional development providers to deliver and sustain Lead, Learn, Excel services for instructional leaders. So we offer a corresponding set of supports for those local professional development providers. And those may include, quality improvement specialists, trainers, technical assistance providers, either within regional constructs like CCR&Rs or within large districts or grantees. Okay. So within the consultation, we start with consultation with system leaders, and in implementing Lead, Learn, Excel over the past year, we have worked with them to determine the professional learning needs within the system. We've assessed existing systems of support for the training and technical assistance providers, for the instructional leaders, and for the teachers. And then we work with them, using that information to co-plan the implementation of Lead, Learn, Excel. And then alongside that, we have been and are continuing to work with them to examine and to shape the policies and the allocation of resources to support and sustain instructional leader roles in job-embedded learning and continuous improvement in their systems. So I'll describe the support services for leaders, and then I'll come back to the co-planning process. So our model includes a suite of professional learning services for instructional leaders. There's training to develop knowledge, technical assistance and coaching to support the transfer of knowledge to practice and to help leaders install the systems and develop their skills. There's also peer learning for leaders to connect with other leaders like themselves to figure out together how can we improve the quality of teaching and learning for all the children in our programs. And then we also offer tools to structure and scaffold and support leaders with implementation, including protocols and templates and guides. And importantly, we try to offer these comprehensive services over 9 to 16 months to really support leaders in learning and in actually implementing the systems and practices and developing their skills over time. Okay, so in the end, leaders gain improved leadership and coaching skills. They improve their skills in using data to inform instruction and continuous improvement. They gain tools to support teachers in creating intentional and developmentally appropriate lesson plans to improve child outcomes. They gain strategies to implement professional learning communities where they didn't exist before, and skills to make them effective. And then similarly, we offer supports for those local professional development providers for them to be able to offer and sustain the Lead, Learn, Excel supports for instructional leaders in their system. So towards this goal, we try to leverage and support where possible existing providers to integrate Lead, Learn, Excel with any other supports they're already providing to leaders or to teachers. And we intentionally explored ways to pilot Lead, Learn, Excel in the short term while building local capacity of the systems over the long term. So through co-planning, when system leaders decide they want to proceed with implementing Lead, Learn, Excel, we'll start this co-planning process. And so through that, we try to ensure that Lead, Learn, Excel is fit to the state and local context, that it's aligned to state standards, that it engages leaders so it's feasible for them to participate in and has appropriate incentives like the professional development credits that they need. We integrate it with other improvement efforts where possible, and we try to make sure that it can be sustainable and continuously improved over time. So what this looks like is usually we start small in the first year with 1 or 2 cohorts, and we try to collect data and learn from implementation about what works. And that's where we are in the iteration of our model. We're learning alongside our partners about how best to support instructional leaders, how to support local professional development providers, and how to build these supports into the system in a sustainable way. Marsha, is there anything else you would add?
No, I actually think what we want to. I'm looking at the chat boxes, and I'm answered one of the questions on the 5 essentials. That was the research conducted on K-12 schools, and responded that the early ed essentials has been in use in the validation study in pre-K and community-based mixed age group settings. But another question that came up is how it specifically is working in infant toddler settings, including family child care homes. And I think I'd like to be able to answer that because we did get to have an experience in our Illinois work as well as the work that we're doing in our Illinois partners with the birth to 5 setting. So I do have some information about that. Family child care homes are just actually becoming part of the work that we're doing. So I don't have any data on that, but I can tell you when we've done with our work in Illinois, we had 26 sites that went through an award of excellence in infant toddler services and were really successful using these principles and practices. And the other question was, and I don't know if you want to answer this, was how does the program break down by groups of leader by geography? Because I think that is a good question. We've got different leaders.
Yeah. So we are implementing Lead, Learn, Excel in a few different places. So in terms of geography, as Marsha said, we're implementing in Illinois with a few agencies that have Head Start programs. And we are implementing in the state of Tennessee, where leaders from the voluntary pre-K program are participating. And in Tennessee, the state pre-K program is almost entirely based in school districts and school buildings. And in Oregon, it's mixed delivery, so we have participation of leaders from schools, centers, and CCR&Rs and family child care leaders. So, yeah, and Margie McNabb chimed in from Oregon.
So this is Debbie. This is Debbie.
Yeah.
Hi. Let me jump in here. I can see that Oregon is saying that that they've started a cohort and people are traveling rather far to join in on that work, and that the approach is working to support a mixed delivery system between centers, school-based preschools, family, and certified homes. So, but in what I think I hear you folks saying is that in other contexts, it could be geography specific, like all the programs in a catchment area are able to participate. And then this led me to thinking about, are your cohort meetings typically face-to-face, or do you use technology to overcome like a traveling issue? What kind of experimenting have you done with that?
Yeah, good question. So with the trainings are face-to-face, and we do have people traveling, up to a few hours. Some, as Margie said, are even flying across the state of Oregon. But the goal is to develop the capacity of local PD providers around the state so that they can then grow and expand so that they can support cohorts in their part of the state. So this is just our beginning effort to reach people all over. But then the technical assistance and the peer learning can be done virtually. So we use phone conferencing, video conferencing to provide those individualized and smaller group supports on a more regular basis during and after the training. We use video conferencing and phones to provide peer learning opportunities for groups so that they don't have to travel to get everywhere. And we're
I'd like to dig in a little bit deeper on this infant-toddler issue. So basically, I think what I'm hearing you say is that you're using the same protocol, and levels and intervening at all the levels, but it's really just that the content of what instruction looks like. Of course, the developmental data is different because it's around infant toddlers, and what does your assessment look like, and what curriculum are you implementing, those kinds of questions, with different expertise in the TA cadre to really address and hone in on what's best practice for the infant toddler crowd, right? So it's kind of the same protocol, but with the TA people more deeply trained in best practice for infant toddler, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And in our trainings in Illinois, in our trainings in Illinois, we would have different examples and different scenarios for the infant toddler folks than from the preschool, and had them in small groups together.
That's great. There's another question. What I was really intrigued about is part of this model is developing a sustainable approach of self-learning, and self-growth for the program and the instructional leader in the end to be able to support and work on it, the quality in the facility themselves, right? So that your instruction, and maybe with a technical assistance person after the initial training on the model, maybe with a technical assistance providing some booster information or booster, subsequent to the initial installation of the model, so that it is a self-sustaining factor. I think this notion of the instructional leader within a program has a lot of appeal for state leaders, because we're looking at the cost and the and trying to change the culture from the inside the program versus applying a technical assistance person that's going to work with the program ongoing forever, right? And where the change isn't sustainable or like living within the program itself, teaching the teachers to understand data, their own data, and create their own cycles of improvement. Could you talk a little bit more about the data dives and what that involves and what you're trying to get to with the teachers and working in that way?
I'm going to just talk from experience because we have a framework for data dialogues. And initially, I mean, we show at a global level how you can use classroom level data to help inform the questioning. So it always begins with it's quite a robust protocol for data dialogues. But you start with the data that you have, but you begin with the question. What are some of the things that you are wondering about the data? So it begins with the questions about what you're going to be looking at. So you start with that. I mean, we start with an introduction of that, but then it extends into how you can use the same kinds of protocols to extend to how do you look at classroom level data, like your actual students within one class. How can you use the data to look at individual children over time? So the data dialogues become a framework and a protocol that you can use in many different ways in the work that you do with both classroom with teachers as well as teachers with students.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we really wanted to empower teachers to analyze the data themselves, by going through the structured protocol, with their peers and with some facilitation. But we tried to create a different dynamic where it was about their learning and about improvement rather than them just receiving their scores and being told what they needed to work on. We really wanted to make it positive and empower them to really dig deep into understanding what the data means.
Mm-hmm. And so you're saying you can begin at classroom tools like ERS or the class tool or whatever, like observational protocol you're using, and then you're getting to the child data and having a look at that in terms of are you supporting all the developmental areas and, and they might have questions. Gosh, I've noticed that this time of day or whatever doesn't feel like it's working. What kind of, you might also add in data sources to solve a problem, right? Okay.
Yeah. Often, there are times of day where they're doing well and other times of day where they're struggling. And they can start to see that by digging into those observation cycles, like with the class, and then understand how to use those strengths, the things that they are doing well, how to do that more often and more consistently.
I heard you mention training hours, and we've had some discussion about that with our teams, training hours counting for professional development hours like technical assistance. So if a teacher is involved in the project and working with technical assistance and planning and peer exchange, that they're also earning professional development credits toward their quote-unquote training hours that might be required. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, when I brought that up, I was talking about just getting the training hours for participating in the Lead, Learn, Excel training that will, wherever we go, we try to make sure that can happen. But I would say part of the consultation and working with the system leaders is to try to shape the system so that it's more supportive of job-embedded learning. And so trying to figure out with them ways that coaching, ways that teacher collaboration can count for professional development hours, and that it's not just a system based only on training hours.
That's great. If we're finding out that this works better, then let's think about how our systems are set up to support it, right?
That's right.
That's exactly what we're grappling with in Illinois, and I think with other states, because if this on-the-job, job-embedded really helps advance teachers thinking about teaching and learning practices, then that should count. But who delivers it, how it's done, how it's tracked, how you're seeing it over time is also a part of it being a very rich learning experience.
We have one final question in the chat box, and then we're going to move to Valerie's discussion and circle back and have some panel discussion at the end. Again, people are very interested in the research that this model is based on. And they are asking, again, the research seems to be heavier in the K-12 space, and, transitioning and supporting that research and what it's showing about the birth to 5 space is a question. And whether, because the initial research was more in a school-based setting, what you're learning about mixed delivery systems in terms of the success of the model. Like child care, Head Start, of course, school-based pre-K. Is there any difference, or are you feeling anything there?
I would say there's definitely research to support the importance of leadership and job-embedded learning in early childhood centers and Head Start programs for sure. Our own research, we've validated the Early Essentials measurement tool for early childhood to show that, the stronger leadership and teacher collaboration are, the more they relate to higher class scores. So, it's about creating that environment of, professional learning and continuous improvement, and a real supportive environment for teachers that helps them excel and achieve quality. And I would say for family child care, there's good reason to believe that collaborative learning and job-embedded learning for them will be just as important. But I think we're going to learn a lot more about how to do that well.
And I could see with family child care. Yeah, and I could see with family child care, if you created a cohort of people working on it together, they could serve as each other's mentors. Like you 5 are in a cohort together with a TA person,
exactly.
Facilitating the conversation. But it's how do you create a little bit wider cohort when you're dealing with one person, right? That's probably part of the challenge, right?
Right, and I think there's some research on family child care networks that would support this too. Getting I think teachers can be very isolated. Family child care providers can too, and bringing people together to really talk about their work and feel that passion and see what a difference it can make when you have someone else to talk to about your work and get ideas and sometimes be challenged in a way that you wouldn't otherwise be, to think about something differently. I think it can be de-isolating people and getting them into that kind of supportive, reflective place with their peers can be really powerful.
And we're hearing from Washington that they've started a family child care cohort, which is going well. So this is on the horizon as well. I'm sorry, Marsha, what were you going to say?
I was going to say that one of the things that I think the framework really I want to call attention to is that it's creating the organizational conditions that are best for teaching and learning. And so in family child care, the family child care provider is the instructional leader. So I'm excited that in Washington that a family child care cohort is going well. That's great.
Well, thank you both so much, and we'll come back at the end. But right now I'd like to turn to Valerie for her to share the approach that they're taking out of the Lassinger Center and the coaching model that they're working with. Hi, Valerie.
Hi, Deb. Greetings, everyone. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay. So greetings from sunny South Florida. As Deb said, my name is Valerie Mendez-Fariñas, and I work with the Lassinger Center for Learning at the University of Florida. Funny enough, I'm actually not in Gainesville. I am in Miami, which is home to me. So, yeah, that's always an interesting fact. So this morning, and it's interesting, Marsha and Rebecca, as I heard you speak, I was nodding my head because in many ways we are fellow travelers and share many of the same beliefs and assumptions about job-embedded professional learning. But today what I'm going to offer is a different perspective, digging similarly into the collaboration routines from the 5 Essentials framework. I'm really going to speak to you all about our efforts to create a certification system for the local PD providers in our state and what we've learned throughout that process And again, I love speaking about our work, but I often find that it's truly a reciprocal process, because by your questions and oftentimes many of your feedback, it really helps to strengthen and to push my own thinking. So I encourage you to add some questions to the chat box. So I was ambitious in terms of the amount of slides, and I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get to all of them. So I'm actually just going to start. I'm clicking on it, but it's not necessarily showing up. Here we go. All right, so I'm going to start with that geography and just give you a quick overview of how this model came to be. Our state doesn't have a statewide quality improvement system. Rather, it's all driven locally. And so we had a tremendous challenge when we were thinking about conceptualizing a statewide certification model, because each of our local partners really did things very differently. And so we had to really think hard around what we were going to do to meet the needs of our providers. And I will say that this is one element of a larger professional development initiative that is connected to this coaching model. So it's really rooted in a study that we did for our Office of Early Learning. And so we really captured a lot of what teachers felt they needed, what local organizations felt they needed, and in this case, what coaches needed. And so what we were challenged to do was to really create support for the coaches who work in our early learning centers and family child care homes, but to really create something that wasn't redundant, but rather scaffolded the training they had already received and the skills that they had already developed. And so as you can see here, I often call this the unicorn, because when you all know, when you research and you survey folks, you know, they tell you everything they want, and then you're kind of like faced with this challenge, wow, how do I create this? And so our attempt to create something that was responsive and not redundant, sustainable yet rigorous, and cost efficient was to really think about what it meant to go beyond technical assistance and really almost professionalize our coaching work, and thinking about quality improvement specialists as not just technical assistants, but as coaches. And so we landed on this model. Am I clicking, or there we go. I figured that out. So we landed on a model that would incorporate technical assistance and coaching, but it would serve as a visual reminder for our quality improvement specialists that they needed to move beyond TA, and that they needed to be strategic about the supports that they provided so that it would lead to more reflective practice, and it would really serve as a gradual release model where they were cultivating reflective practice for teachers. And really the adage that I often share with our coaches is that in many ways as a workforce, we have become reliant on giving people fish instead of teaching them to fish. And, you know, as we know, if you give somebody fish, they'll eat for the day. But if you teach them how to fish, they'll eat for a lifetime. And so our model is really about this idea of quality improvement supports being a continuum, where granted relationships are the most important thing that you can do with providers, but those relationships need to, you know, move you from just being like congenial and friendly with teachers to being collegial and really looking at aspects of your practice and really not just learning new skills, but actually implementing them. And as Marsha and Rebecca were sharing, really getting them to more sophisticated ways of examining their practice through data and through communities of practice and whatnot. And so this visual represents everything that a quality improvement specialist would do with a provider. And what we hope is that it really serves as a roadmap for them to do their work and to move beyond the, you want to call them softer skills of technical assistance to the more complex skills about coaching. And so thinking about the candidates that we've engaged in our certification program, because our state is so diverse in terms of the local structures, we really had to create the certification process to reflect really the processes related to coaching and leave some of the typical requirements like education requirements, experience requirements to the local entities. And so our model doesn't require that folks have a certain degree or years of experience. What we really ask is for folks to have really strong content knowledge, and we focus on the processes. And we also make sure that with our training approach that it's job embedded, and so we want to make sure that anyone that attends our certification program is currently working with a provider so that they can practice the skills that we're training them on and come back to our sessions with actual artifacts from the field. So that's a really important aspect of the training program. We've also tried to structure the model so that it really serves as a parallel process to what we'd like teachers to do. And so in many ways, we have structured this in a way that our coaches can experience high-quality job-embedded professional development, which also serves as a model for them to provide with the teachers that they work with. Our training approach is also rooted in the idea of sustainability and creating a pipeline of coaches. And so we don't just end our training certification with the initial, like we call it the 100 level, the initial certification, but we also provide ongoing supports for our coaches, and we also provide leadership opportunities for them. So at this point, we are in our 4th year. We've certified over 350 coaches across the state. We've done that with about 22 cohorts. And what we're doing now is we are offering these 300-level experiences where many of the coaches that we've worked with, as early as 2015 are now serving as mentor coaches who co-facilitate experiences with us. So again, the university is moving out and kind of like, gradually releasing this to the local entities. And we're also engaging many of our certification graduates as assessors. And so they are the ones that are assessing the portfolios that our candidates submit for certification consideration. And so this is one of the core values at the Lastinger Center, where we really want to, we often say it's to work ourselves out of a job, but we really want to make sure that what we're creating is not a dependency model, but that we're really creating capacity across the state. And that's really where we're at now, given that we're at year 4. The other thing I just want to point out is going back to the idea of job-embedded learning, our coaching certification candidates really are engaged in a rigorous training process. They meet every 4 to 6 weeks, and every time we meet, in addition to, reflecting on their implementation stories, we really look at artifacts from the field, and we really pride ourselves on offering differentiated feedback for their own growth. And so you'll see that there's different benchmarks. For the most part, they are video artifacts as well as written artifacts and data, but we really try to make it a cornerstone of our training program so that they're constantly, it's not just, you attend, you pass, or there's this final test at the end of the experience, but that they're really receiving ongoing feedback and that they're using an inquiry approach to apply and examine the things that they're learning. Our certification is competency-based, and so our candidates do submit videos of their coaching performance, and it's rated against our rubric. I often equate our rubric to the Jessica Seinfeld had this book. It was Deceptively Delicious, and it was all about how to sneak vegetables into ingredients so kids would eat healthy foods. Our rubric is kind of like that, because while it only has 7 criteria, and while what we assess is the final step in the coaching cycle, the conversation between the teacher and the coach, it really reveals a lot of the steps that came before. And so we look at things that are respective to the relationship that this coach has established with the teacher. We also look at the data that the coach has collected, and it really reveals a lot of the skills that we've incorporated into our training program, and it offers us a space to give the coach feedback, not just on things like questioning strategies or tone, but it also offers us the space to give really individualized feedback on the way that they've collected and presented data with the teacher, and as well as how they are helping the teacher move from, again, more simple objective meaning of data to more complex meaning from data that's going to lead to action. The way that we assess our coaches is, as I said, through video, and what we do is we offer timestamp feedback that really individualizes the type of support and feedback that we offer them. So we use a platform that allows our assessors to document why it is that they scored a certain way on our rubric, what evidence did they see that was consistent with the criteria on our rubric, and it also provides a space for us to offer suggestions. And, again, we like to call it feedback for growth, because it's not just about what you did wrong, but what you could do to really develop and refine the skills that aren't necessarily where potentially they need to be. And so this is one of the strategies that we use, and we found that has been really effective in terms of providing support, not just when we're face-to-face, but also thinking about the virtual supports that we could offer our candidates when they're not attending our face-to-face sessions. Now, I said earlier that we had this challenge to create this unicorn model, and so we had to make some really strategic decisions that now that we're in other states, we're kind of noticing that other states are kind of wrestling with these same questions. Because our workforce is not like in the K-12 setting where we have planning periods and we have even spaces for coaches and teachers to meet, we really had to create the model around the notion that coaches have a set amount of time to work with teachers. And so what we did intentionally was we work with our coaches to really narrow their focus so that rather than working on, let's say, the entire instructional support domain of class, they're really looking at, narrow focuses for each coaching cycle. And so they work with teachers around one to two key teaching practices at a time. And they make sure, we often say it's like the domino effect that Bob Pianta talks about. If you can get it right, and if you could really work on the process of learning, implementing, and then reflecting on the data that shows your implementation of these practices, then everything will kind of fall into place. And so what that also allows the coaches to do is to work with all of the teachers in their caseload. And what it allows us to do is to not burden them with producing these 1 hour videos that are not going to be realistic of the way that they interact with teachers, but it gives us these 10 to 15-minute conversations that are really impactful and can really reveal some of the skills that they have and that they could potentially transfer and work with more teachers than just, one or two. It's also really rooted in the idea that we want to develop reflective practice in teachers, and the same way that our goal is to work ourselves out of the state and turn this training and this certification program over to our local communities, we tell our coaches that the idea is to engage your teachers in enough of these coaching cycles that this will become their way of work, and you will cultivate the dispositions they need to be able to look at their own practice and reflect on their practice, not only when the coach is there, but also when the coach is not there.
So, Valerie, if I could interrupt for just a moment, can you give us so you're talking about almost a parallel process of the coach helping the teacher to reflect on their practice, but at the same time, this project is about helping the coach reflect on their own practice, right? Can you give us an example of when you said the narrowed focus for the video, the particular engagement or whatever? Can you just give us an example or two about what that what that means? Like what kind of
Sure,
practice would you be looking for? Yeah.
So let's say, for example, the teacher wants to focus on behavior guidance. And the coach would dig further and say, okay, well, what is it about behavior guidance that you have questions about or that you're wrestling with? And maybe the teacher says, oh, well, you know, the kids are always fighting and I'm really just trying to figure out how to get them not to fight. The coach's job would then be to provide supports around behavior guidance. Maybe they want to work on a teaching practice like being proactive and, you know, working on proximity so that, you know, you can kind of address the behavior before it gets worse. Or maybe it's about providing clear and consistent directions. And so the coach's job is really almost I often call it a funnel, to really listen to teachers and what it is that they're grappling with, kind of narrow that focus, and then offer a high-impact strategy that the teacher is going to implement, and then the coach would collect data around.
I see. Thank you. That was very helpful.
Did you have any other questions?
No, I think and this notion of, I just love the notion of the coach videoing themselves, like working on their practice with the teacher and getting feedback about, you know, how they're doing their own job. We've heard more and more about the use of videos as a strategy to help teachers understand their practice, and this notion of using a similar strategy to actually help the coaches assess their practice, I think is a really exciting one. So we've seen good success using that approach with teachers, and I just think it's really neat to think about using it at the next level to help coaches improve their practice.
Yeah, and what we do, by the time they finish our certification program, they'll have received feedback, video feedback from 3 different people. So they'll have the first video that they upload, you know, and again, this is we often talk about teachers and, you know, how do we create buy-in for them to allow for themselves to be recorded. It's the same kind of thing for coaches. You know, at first they're like, I have to record a video? Like, no, you know, my manager might shadow me, and that's the closest I've ever had to, you know, individualized feedback. So what we do to kind of soften the blow and get them ready and prime them is that the first video that they upload, a peer will look at it. And it's an exercise in peer coaching, and it's also a way for their peer to become more familiar with the criteria that they're going to be assessed on. And then the second video that they upload is reviewed by their facilitators, so their own coaches, the person who's facilitating this experience for them. And then as a quality measure for ourselves, the final video is assessed by an assessor who has nothing to do with this cohort. And so the benefit of that is not only do I make sure that I have kind of feedback on how the facilitators are doing, but the participant also gets this third perspective on their practice. And so what we've learned is that, you know, for folks, this is, you know, part of the rich experience is that they get these 3 different views on their practice, and maybe as their facilitator, I don't catch a nuance that they have that's really contributing to the dynamic of the relationship, but the assessor might catch it. And so it's part of the added bonus of making sure that not only are we differentiating feedback, but that there's multiple perspectives that are looking at your own practice, and that, you know, they're really pushing your thinking in a different way.
And I'm sure in the face-to-face meetings with the coaches, you're talking about, like, how to create safe spaces, because you're having them do what they're asking the teachers to do. I just love that idea about the parallel nature of the way you've set up this model. It's just very interesting. Keep going, and let's finish your slides. I have a couple of more questions, and I see some popping into the chat box now. But let's finish your slides, and then we can recon back, okay?
Sure. So as I said, we're in our 4th year, and we had a pilot group before this. And so we've learned a lot, and the more that we kept checking in with our coaches, and the more, you know, we're fortunate that our certification is wrapped into many of the state initiatives. And so we've been able to rigorously study and get feedback on our model. And one of the things that we've learned that has been the most impactful is that in many ways, the local entities that have clearly defined roles and responsibilities for their coaches are really seeing the maximum benefits of the model. And so what that means is oftentimes, we've trained and we've certified that the coaches have these skills to be able to conduct these types of, deep and profound coaching conversations. But if the job or the initiative is set up where these coaches are overextended and they have so many clerical responsibilities that they can't fit coaching in, then they're really not going to get the benefit or be able to use some of these skills. So that's one of the things that we're learning now is that, in addition to working with the coaches, we really have to work with some of the local organizations to really think about, what is their readiness for change and what are some of the variables that they need to consider from a programmatic level to make sure that they're maximizing the benefit of the training that these coaches are receiving. We've also heard loud and clear our coaches, they love the professional learning that they're getting. And what we've done, going back to the question of geography, is we have 30 different early learning coalitions, which are our regional hubs. And so what ends up happening with our certification is that, 4 or 5 different regions will come together and have this experience together. And so they love this idea of cross-agency, cross-region collaboration. And so they really have pushed us to say, we want, even if it's twice a year, we want to keep coming back together and refining our skills and hearing from each other what's working in their different local contexts. And so we've offered these calibration sessions, which are the 200 level when you think about that chart I showed earlier. And we've found tremendous success in bringing folks back together and keeping this continuous quality improvement approach with our coaches. We've also learned that, going back to Marsha and Rebecca and the ounces approach, that directors are really important in this formula. And so what we're wrestling with now is these folks that we work with provide supports, but they're an external entity. What we're looking at now is how do we provide a similar experience for site-based directors so that the supports that teachers are getting both internally and externally are aligned. And so that's going to be kind of our next big dive, is thinking about what might this experience look like for directors. And we have had a couple of directors attend our sessions, but we come across the same thing. It's rigorous in terms of the time commitment, and for many of the directors to be pulled away from their centers is very difficult. And so kind of the next frontier is really thinking about how do we create, how can we move some of the supports that we are doing face-to-face and the training we're providing into an online space, and almost create a hybrid experience for directors so that teachers will have these wraparound supports and that they'll be consistent and cohesive among them. The other thing that's really clear is when we think about coaching readiness, it really varies. And for some of our teachers, they're still at that point where they need more directive support, meaning technical assistance, meaning consultation, meaning modeling. And so with some of our coaches, what we're really thinking about is how do you create the dispositions while you're providing technical assistance so that eventually you're going to move towards coaching cycles, but not push teachers into coaching and looking at data when they're not ready to. And so we really talk a lot about what it means and what cues and what do you see in a teacher that tells you that she's ready to move to this more sophisticated and advanced skill of coaching. And then finally, kind of where we're at now, similar to our friends at Lead, Learn, and Excel, we are expanding to other states, and we're really thinking about what it means contextually to adapt the model, and what some of the lessons in terms of rollout and the scope of what we've done and how many folks we've worked with across the state how that translates into other spaces. And so we're currently partnering with First Five in the California Department of Education to create a similar statewide certification for California, and thinking about what it might mean in terms of not just the way that we evaluate coaches, but thinking about the training and the alignment of entities that are already working in California providing training experiences. As I said, we're working on our certification for directors, and then thinking about Florida and just the culture of continuous quality improvement that we've created with our coaches. We're thinking about how we might provide spaces online where our coaches can continue to collaborate and meet virtually, because like I said, it's gotten to the point where this is the norm for them, and they want to collaborate, and they've created structures on their own, but we'd really like to create a space for them so that this becomes and continues whether they're doing face-to-face sessions with us or without. So that's it. I think I was right on time. I was timing myself. So
perfect.
I guess we can open it up. We can open up for questions. I haven't had a chance to look at the chat box. So Debbie, if you want to add.
Yes. So I'm seeing people write into the chat box some of the challenges we face in childcare, probably in particular, with uninterrupted planning or reflection time, and thinking about, and I think that this last comment in the chat box about time to coach teachers, that sometimes it's better to meet with the teacher and just talk through the observation with them. And that kind of gets to what you were saying about, is the teacher ready for the data source of a video approach to their work? So we're talking, remember, at two different levels here. One about is what the coach is doing with the teachers, and the other angle that we're taking is how are we supporting the coaches to develop their own practice. And so I think the questions in the chat box are drifting between, the coach working with the practitioners, but I think what we've been talking about more directly is supporting the coaching field within your state. What are the systems and protocols you've developed to support the coaching cadre, right, within the state? I did have a quick question. I noticed in one of your slides you talked about Jim Knight's coaching behaviors, and I think maybe we could find a resource about that for the participants that we could post. So we'll follow up and try to get some information to post for folks. Do you have anything to add about that, Valerie?
Sure, yeah. So our model actually grew from our K-12 instructional coaching model. So this was our final gift from our emeritus professor. She created the K-12 instructional coaching model, and after a couple of years of implementing that, we thought about, might this be something that we could adapt to the early learning context? And so back from, the inception of the K-12 model, Jim Knight's partnership principles were at the core and the foundational element. And so what we did to create our rubric was, in many ways, we took those partnership principles, which are voice, choice, reciprocity, practice, reflection, dialogue, and we operationalize them to think about, if these are the principles and this is what we value and we want our coaches to, like the beliefs, the stance that they want to have, then what are the skills that would reflect that? And so I can share a chart that I have where it shows, these are the partnership principles on the left column, and then on the right we have, what a coach would do to enact voice, to enact choice. And so that was kind of like the first step in developing the rubric, was really operationalizing and making sure that, we were very explicit about what that looked like in terms of skills. And then the final thing, what the rubric does is it measures those skills. So we've got, it's this continuum of, here are the foundational principles, here's what they look like and how a coach would enact that, and then the rubric looks at how we measure. And for a lot of folks, the missing piece is the evaluation. And so when we think about other states that have coaching certifications, and our partners now in Arizona who have a tremendous kind of training program and onboarding process for their coaches. The only thing they're missing is that evaluation component. And so I'll share that with you all if you wanted to post it on the landing page.
That'd be great.
It kind of it solidifies what it is, the discrete behaviors we're looking at.
Mm-hmm. So now I'd like to, I'm looking for questions or points of view in the chat box, but I'd like to open it to all three of you to just say, when in your work in the field, what are your reflections about helping programs and teachers, helping the coaching cadre be able to help teachers and programs move from compliance measures into this continuous improvement cycle? I think that's one of the things that we've been realizing in the field, that really to engender this reflective practice, continuous improvement approach, it's about working through a culture in a facility. That's why I was excited to hear, Valerie, you mentioned moving into the director sphere for ongoing support to the reflective practice that the coach might be working on, that they could actually support the work. But what is your reflection, and what have you seen about moving beyond this compliance culture into a CQI culture? Any of you?
This is Marsha, and I just want to say that's the hardest shift because it's so much easier to say, what do you want me to do? And the response always has to be, what are you trying to gain? How can you think about what it is that you want instead of trying to figure out exactly what standard it meets, or how often do you have to do facilitated lesson plannings, or how often do you have to coach. So it kind of gets to that individualized process for, that everything the same is not necessarily what everybody needs. And so I find that really difficult to think about that, and yet the framework of really being able to coordinate all the expectations and to think about them together and to work together through them begins the process of demystifying and realizing how many of the same tools or requirements are similar. If you look at all the tools, when teachers have a lot of assessors coming in and they're looking at class assessments, and someone comes in to see their fidelity to a curriculum tool, and then somebody else comes in to measure their social emotional development. I think that if you can be able to help teachers to help everybody look at where are some of the similarities, that begins the process of looking beyond these compliance things, the measurements, and getting to how do we think about improvement in general.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and
go ahead, Valerie.
I would just add that one of the things we work with our coaches to kind of move past is that there's a difference between informational learning and transformational learning. And when we think about informational learning, it's really about knowledge, and it's really about, getting people to demonstrate specific behaviors. And so what job-embedded professional development does is it really looks at, it goes beyond just like do it for the day kind of thing, or do it when you're being assessed, but really it challenges teachers to really think about how these skills align with what they believe and what their attitudes are. And so that's where we start seeing, like with a lot of the coaches, they really turn the corner when they realize that even for themselves, part of that tension is, why is this important, and what do I really believe this is going to do? And so, moving beyond this idea of like just do it and let me, show me that you do it, but really taking the time to say, well, what do you believe, and how does this square with what your own thoughts and your own values are? So I think that's the shift that needs to happen for folks, and for many of them, it takes kind of unpacking their own ideas and their own beliefs in order to be able to kind of move forward and away from like do it because I said so kind of thing to do it because, let's talk about why this is important.
Plus it's feeling safe to risk putting yourself out there, getting feedback, but moving to that reflective teacher, how can we keep improving stance, Once they can do it, I think that teachers and coaches find that it's a way to keep things exciting and interesting and to like transform, as you said, Valerie, into that lifelong learner whose quest is improvement and practice, right? So, well, I'd like to just give each of you a moment to wrap up your thoughts or just what this conversation today brought forward, hearing from each other and from our group, and do a wrap-up, just reflection about, what's next or where you're going from here or something about it. So, Marsha, can we start with you?
Sure. I have really enjoyed first preparing for this and also sharing our ideas with Valerie, and we're talking the same language in terms of job-embedded professional development. And I love the ideas for the coaching model, assessing your coaching model. I think we have such a synchrony in that and how we continue to think about the sustainable supports that people need. I love the idea of refinement of skills, that you have to think together to continue this work, and it's not just a one-shot. And I think many of the things that we're saying are similar but nuanced in both the approach as well as the focus. So I've really appreciated this.
Great. Rebecca, any closing comments or thoughts from what you're hearing?
Yeah, I think it was interesting to really think about the parallel processes, and the supports that are needed for people's learning and professional improvement really at every level, from teachers to leaders to coaches and other professional development providers. Another thing I was reflecting on was really, the importance of attending to the stages of implementation and really, as people are thinking about changing their, developing their skills and changing their roles and responsibilities, to really attend to those logistical pieces, like people's job descriptions and the amount of other responsibilities that they have. That there are some systemic things and logistical things that need to be worked out in order to make implementation possible.
That's a great point. The nitty-gritty, right? And how do you phase in a new approach like this or a new standard? Definitely.
Yeah. I mean, the motivation, the personal motivation is really important too, as people talked about the importance of understanding the why and what do you want to gain. And that's critical, but really getting to logistics can be just as critical too.
For sure. Valerie, last thoughts?
No, I appreciate the difference in perspectives and approaches, and I think what we've heard from both of our approaches is that it really takes, you really have to kind of attack this from multiple levels in the system, and that whether you start with the directors or you start with the local PD providers, you really need to be you need to differentiate the supports that you offer. And in the end, really keep listening to what's working and what's not working and keep refining it. But I think it's just a testament to, how complex and how adaptive this work is, and how, you really just need to be intentional in your approach. And I think what both Marsha and Rebecca and what we share is that, there's a core set of principles and values that guide the work, and no matter however which way we're approaching it or who we're working with, we really, fall back on these ideas of what really works and what really shifts practice and changes behavior.
Well, I think what I've really appreciated in hearing from both the Ounce and the Lassinger Center work is what learning organizations both of those organizations are. You know, that you're really still in a position where what you're putting out on the ground, you're learning back from, and you're continuing to adapt these models and change them, you know, based on how they're working and what you're seeing and what you're hearing from people implementing them and the teacher and provider on the ground. So I just think you're both a testament to living, you know, what you're talking about with the continuous improvement, reflective stance in what you're putting out there in the field. And I